Well, hello and welcome back to a look at the Screwtape letters. This is lesson 5, and today we're going to be considering letters number 10 through 12. They're normally given Roman numerals in the Screwtape letters. Again, magazine articles in a publication known as The Guardian, and they were published back in 1940, and it was in 1942 that this came out in book form. The letters, the imaginary fictional letters of Screwtape to Wormwood, a senior demon to a junior demon who also happens to be his nephew, and how to deal with a patient. We come to letter 10, and I have given this letter the title. I'm titling these letters just to help us kind of pick a theme or from each, is Friends. Friends, that seems to be a topic that Screwtape takes on in this particular letter. And he begins by commending Wormwood on the friends that the patient has. He describes them this way. He says, they are vaguely pacifist, not on moral grounds, but from an ingrained habit of belittling anything that concerns the great mass of their fellow man, and from a dash of purely fashionable and literary communism. In other words, he says they're pacifists just because most people aren't, and it's a great way to annoy them. And Screwtape, I often use those interchangeably, but Screwtape is telling Wormwood, look, this is a great way to keep him silent about his faith, because he's going to want to impress his friends, and around them to be one thing, and around other friends to be something different. He says, this is another great quote, all mortals tend to turn into the thing they are pretending to be. All mortals tend to turn into the thing they are pretending to be. And so what Screwtape says to Wormwood is you need to encourage him to cultivate two spheres of friends, the ones from his spiritual life and the ones that he just wants to impress. And he goes on to say this, if this succeeds, he can be induced to live, as I have known many humans live, for quite long periods, two parallel lives. He will not only appear to be, but actually be, a different man in each of the circles he frequents. And I wonder how that might be true of you or has been true in the past. I can think back to jobs I held, particularly in college, where I didn't necessarily want to deny my faith, or where I didn't want people not to know I was a Christian, but I was also more or less happy to keep that on the back burner, kind of keep that subdued, because I wanted their admiration more than I cared about letting them know about my faith. Just that desire to be liked and admired, and would I risk that if they knew of my faith, of my commitment? And I don't think this is, in fact, I'm sure it's not Lewis's way of saying never have any friends unless they're Christians. That's not his point at all. But he's talking about the desire for approval from certain friends and how much you might let that friendship overshadow your faith. It's a call to be wise about the nature of the world, right? I mean, the world is all that's opposed to God and who He is, and so it's really just urging the path of wisdom. Screwtape goes on to write, I see few of the old warnings about worldly vanities, the choice of friends, and the value of time. All that your patient would probably classify as Puritanism. And may I remark in passing that the value we have given to that word is one of the really solid triumphs of the last 100 years. By it, we rescue annually thousands of humans from temperance, chastity, and sobriety of life. I mean, that's a great quote. How that to be Puritanism or puritanical, the way it's used in 1940, the way it's used today, that's something entirely negative to our culture. It kind of fits the definition. I don't know who came up with this, but the misguided notion that a Puritan was someone who was deeply concerned that someone else, somewhere, was having a good time. I mean, we hear the terms puritanical or a Puritan. We just think of an austere, rigid, no smiles, no laughter, nothing fun. Um, all is um, all is legalism. That's what a Puritan or what puritanical is. And Screwtape, the voice of the demon, says, "Hey, that's been one of our great triumphs, to get that word twisted to mean that." And so, again, I think the point in this letter is the value of these types of friends to Screwtape and thus to Wormwood is that how it might pull the patient away from a vibrant faith. And so then we read this quote: "Finally, if all else fails, you can persuade him, in defiance of conscience, to continue the new acquaintance on the ground that he is, in some unspecified way, doing these people good by the mere fact of drinking their cocktails and laughing at their jokes. And to cease to do so would be priggish, intolerant, and of course, puritanical." A really great, a great quote. Um, that type of mentality may flow out of a person who embraces the idea that says, preach the gospel at all times, and if necessary, use words, which I think is a horribly misguided statement, right? That's analogous to saying, here, call somebody on your phone, and if necessary, use the digits of their number. That's the gospel is a message to be believed. Our actions can serve to bolster and enhance our message, but actions alone aren't enough to save anyone, to point anyone to Christ, to show them who Jesus is and what he's done for us. And so, a person says, well, I'm with these people and my actions will be enough. Sadly, that's not enough, as we know. So that was letter 10, as he talked about friends. What about letter 11? Here's where, in letter 11, we get a lot of good insight on humor. And once again, Lewis is extremely insightful. And he's Screwtape, Lewis through Screwtape, says this: "I divide the causes of human laughter into joy, fun, the joke proper, and flippancy." All right, those four again: joy, fun, the joke proper, and flippancy. And he defines joy this way: what you experience the first night you're reunited with friends or family on the eve of a holiday, as Lewis puts it, or we could say on the eve of a visit or a vacation or a trip. And I think about, whenever I read that, I think about the weekends that I get with my college buddies when we gather on the beach together once a year, and that feeling where old friends, as we gather together on that first night, and there's just so much laughter and joy. Or maybe when you've got family that lives a long ways away, and they show up, and when they first show up at the house, just the joy and the laughter and the excitement that's there. That's joy. And then fun it's close to joy. It's the emotional, again, this is the word, the emotional froth, to quote Screwtape, arising from the play instinct. The joke proper, or humor, writes Screwtape, is invaluable as a means of destroying shame. I want to read that again. The joke proper, or humor, is invaluable as a means of destroying shame. And think about that. Think how humor today, I don't want to sound like I'm one of those pastors that's just always beating up TV and movies, but you think about just modern humor that we hear today, a lot of it touches on, it's rare, let me put it this way, it's rare to find the comedian, and we do find one that's, quote, clean. They're an anomaly. But so much humor, so much of the jokes that are offered, a lot of times, really, the humor itself is it destroys shame. There is, in fact, there is no shame. Let me read this quote. Cruelty is shameful unless the cruel man can represent it as a practical joke. 1,000 bawdy or even blasphemous jokes do not help towards a man's damnation so much as his discovery that almost anything he wants to do can be done, not only without the disapproval, but with the admiration of his fellows, if only it can get itself treated as a joke. Just the power of humor. I just think that's incredibly insightful. And then, so Screwtape in that letter talks about joy, fun, the joke proper, and then he gets to flippancy. And Screwtape says this: that's the ultimate. That's probably, that's our best weapon. Flippancy. It's what is flippancy? It's a belittling, apathetic attitude. Yes. The habit of flippancy builds up around a man the finest armor plating against the enemy that I know, and it is quite free from the dangers inherent in the other sources of laughter. I'll read that again. The habit of flippancy builds up around a man the finest armor plating against the enemy, against God, that I know, and it is quite free from the dangers inherent in the other sources of laughter. So in that one quote, Screwtape's acknowledging the power of joy and laughter as a gift of God, but he says flippancy, that's our tool. And it reminds me of the quote we saw last week in that letter on pleasure, how that Screwtape acknowledges that all we can do, as he speaks about being a demon, the evil forces, is mimic the pleasures of God, because all pleasure, he rightfully says, comes from God. And it's the same thing with joy and laughter. All true sources of joy and laughter come from him, that God is the source of joy. And so their attempt, the demonic scheme, is flippancy. I don't care. The pursuit of apathy, that's flippancy. So letter 11 is humor. Letter 11 is humor. And letter 12 I found to be very, very powerful and insightful. Here's a letter, or as part of the Screwtape letters, written 80 years ago, right? 1940, here we are in 2020. So 80 years ago. And I believe Lewis in this letter puts his finger on a struggle that's rampant right now in our own cultural moment. He begins this letter, and I would call this letter 12, the power of nothing. Letter 12, the power of nothing. Screwtape lauds the spiritual drift that he sees in the patient, and how that the patient is at a place in his life where some of us sadly can get, where he almost wants to be distracted from the word and prayer. Isn't it interesting how you can wake up in the morning and look at your phone or look at the internet, and you find yourself looking at all kind of silly things. And I'll just look at this, and then I'll read my Bible. Oh, I'll look at this, and then I'll spend some time in prayer. I mean, that's what's happening here. And Screwtape writes this: you no longer need a good book, which he really likes, to keep him from his prayers or his work or his sleep. A column of advertisements in yesterday's paper will do, right? And he goes on to write, all the healthy and outgoing activities which we want him to avoid can be inhibited and nothing given in return, so that at least he may say, as one of my own patients said on his arrival down here to hell, I now see that I spent most of my life in doing neither what I ought nor what I liked. I like that last quote. I now see that I spent most of my life in doing neither what I ought or what I liked. The power of nothing. The power of distraction. One of the things that reminds me of, they said that for a college student, the time of year when their apartment or dorm is the cleanest is during finals week. Why is that? Because they'd rather do anything but study. They'll even clean their apartment rather than study. And I think that's kind of what we're getting at here. And so here's Lewis writing this in 1940, He could have been writing it today. The pull, I mean, the pull of the internet, the pull of our mobile phone, the pull of YouTube. I mean, it's there. I mean, it's sucking the life out of us. It's sucking the life out of me. We start flipping through YouTube videos, and before we know it, we've wasted hours that could have been spent in God's Word, or reading a book, or enjoying a sunset. Not that we have to use every waking moment of the day as if we're a monk. We can only read our Bibles and only spend time in prayer, but just something much more worthwhile. And I'm struggling with that as much as you are. How that minutes soon become an hour, and an hour becomes two, and we all complain about seeing families, or even looking at our own families, and being gathered in the same room, and we're all looking at our phones, checking email, checking texts, checking social media. We all struggle with that, and it's just interesting how that Lewis here in 1940 puts his finger on this problem. And here's another helpful quote. But do remember, the only thing that matters is the extent to which you separate the man from the enemy. It does not matter how small the sins are, provided that their cumulative effect is to edge the man away from the light out into the nothing. Murder is no better than cards if cards can do the trick. And when Lewis says cards, he's talking about something. He's not saying cards are in any way simple. He's saying murder, or just something totally innocuous. It doesn't matter. Anything that draws your patient away from the enemy can do the trick. Indeed, here's the money quote. Indeed, the safest road to hell is the gradual one, the gentle slope, soft underfoot, without sudden turnings, without milestones, without signposts. And how wise of Lewis to see into our time, in a manner of speaking, and to see how we're all being drifted off to sleep, how people are being distracted by nothing, by obsession with entertainment and the phone and the internet. And I wrestle too. I'm not the paragon of virtue. I was struck by how timely this particular letter is to us today. So that's letters 10, 11, and 12 of the Screwtape letters for today. Kind of a brief lesson this week, but a good look into humor. So a good look into letter 10 on friends, letter 11 on humor, and letter 12, the power of nothing. Well, I hope you'll download next week's video and watch as we get into letters 13, 14, and 15. Thanks for being with me.